Hi everyone, I'm International Master and Women Grandmaster from Romania, Irina Bulmaga. Nice to meet you. I thought that today we can have a look at how to play with opposite colored bishops and also how to get there from having the pair of bishops. And that's when I have a joke usually that do you know what's the biggest advantage of having the pair of bishops?
That you can trade them.
Yes, that at any moment you can trade one of them. Right. So okay, the first game I played recently in a tournament in La Palma. It was a nice tournament for me. I made 9 out of 9, unlike here. So I played here against a woman grandmaster from Hungary, Gara Tisia, and after e4 she surprised me by playing e5, as she played only Sicilian before. And well, I had a feeling she was going for the Petrov, so I played bishop c4 to avoid it, knight f6, d3, c6, knight f3, d5, bishop b3. Now there are a few options. Black can either give a check on b4 first, or they can play bishop d6 to immediately defend the pawn. That's what she did. Knight c3 now. The idea is that after d takes e4 we have the intermediate move knight g5, and after short castle knight takes e4. And now you can see that maybe soon we will have that pair of bishops. Knight takes e4, knight takes. If black just plays bishop c7, then okay, we have a nice position, either bishop g5 first or short castle immediately, and we will try to put some pressure on the pawn from e5. In the game she chose to play bishop f5, and now queen f3, forcing black to take on e4, d takes e4. And here are the pair of bishops. Knight d7. Okay, now white's advantage is minimal here. Black wants to play knight c5 and then take one of the bishops, and then it will be totally equal. So white should come up with a plan. I will give you a heads up, it's an unusual plan. So let's see what can you think of here. C3 was one move which I considered, but after knight c5, bishop c2 is kind of forced. And okay, now black can play something like b5, queen c7 or queen e7, rook d8, and okay, we have the pair of bishops, but the bishop on c2 is not really doing much. It's kind of a passive piece now, and if to compare it with the knight from c5, it is clear that it's not white who's better. So that move is a candidate, but what? A3. A3 was the move which I planned initially when coming to this position, but unfortunately I discovered that after knight c5, bishop a2, which move does black have here? It's nice, of course, that we are keeping the bishop on this diagonal a2 g8, but there is one move after which we might be losing a pawn.
Queen h5?
It's queen h4 actually. Queen h4, and now the pawn on e4 is impossible to be defended. And when I discovered that, I decided that I should do something about it. So I played the move h4. Well, usually it's not something I recommend to keep the king in the center. It's best to continue the development, to finish it, castle, and then only start some active play. But this position is an exception. Now knight c5 is the logical follow-up for black. h5 now. You know, if you followed the development of the engines, you probably know about AlphaZero, and this artificial intelligence usually likes to push the A or the H pawn until the end, so that it either opens the king, or in the endgame, let's imagine that we play h6 and black plays g6. The pawn on h7 might be a weakness if, for example, we exchange all pieces and the rook somehow comes to the 7th rank or the 8th rank. So that is an idea I like to play myself. So black played h6. And now, the question is what to do next.
Bishop d2 and non-castle?
This is an interesting option indeed, bishop d2. Well, here knight takes b3 would probably be logical, a takes b3, queen e7, and the problem of long castle is that a5 and a4 will be coming, and unfortunately it's black's attack which is more dangerous than white's in this position. So that's why I wanted to still keep my options, and I played queen g4. How? G4. Oh wow, that's a very active move indeed. But here black will always have bishop e7, so then after bishop g5 we will have some weak dark squares when exchanging these bishops. Instead the move was queen g4, threatening to take on h6, and another idea which comes after, for example, king h8 or king h7 is to play rook h3 and bring it towards g3. That's another nice maneuver which is possible after pushing the h pawn. In the game queen c8 followed, and now we can of course go to the end game, but then we will still be losing the b3 bishop. I mean, we'll be exchanging it, and then we'll have some troubles with the pawn on e4 maybe. Also we'll have to take care of that. So I played an unusual move, which is rook h4. Well, now if queen takes g4, then rook takes g4. The pawn on h6 is hanging, so black has to go on h8 or on h7, let's say. And the idea is that if he doesn't take on b3, then he will always have trouble with the pawn on f7, and if pushing it forward, the king will be stuck on h8. While if taking on b3, then a takes b3, and then when black will play a6, because we will be playing bishop e3 threatening that pawn, maybe we will have bishop b6, and then it will be difficult for black to control the d file. So she found a good move here, which is king h8 first, not taking on g4 immediately, so that she will win a tempo if I will take on c8. Bishop e3 follow, logical development, bishop e7. And now it's the moment of truth. How should white continue now? And don't forget about the joke in the beginning about the biggest strengths of having the pair of bishops, the biggest advantages.
You took c5?
Yes, bishop takes c5 indeed, because bishop takes h4 is not possible. We'll just take queen h4 and have two bishops for a rook. She took on c5. Now queen f5. It was also possible to take on c8, but I had a different idea. The point is that after bishop, queen takes f5, e takes f5. that's what I was saying earlier. Now Black's king will have a little bit trouble to get to the center, because, okay, after f6 there is absolutely no way he will be passing this a2 g8 diagonal. And in the same time, if not playing this, then the pawn on f7 has to be guarded all the time by the rook. She played rook d8, logical move to take off the open file, and now rook e4. And Black has some problems to solve here about defending the pawn on e5. Rook f e8 is not possible, the pawn on f7 is hanging. Rook d2 e8, then okay, we're just taking the d file by playing rook d1. So the logical move would be bishop d6, I guess. But then after rook d1, Black is having again trouble, because after bishop c7 we just take on d8, and now if rook d8, again the pawn on f7 is hanging. If bishop d8 we can take rook takes e5, and after bishop f6 we retreat, and the problem is that bishop b2 will be met with rook e7, and again the 7th rank is very weak and the king on h8 is not doing well. So she decided to give up this pawn on e5. She played king g8 immediately. I took. And okay, we are a pawn up, but the problem is that our pawn is doubled, so it's not so easy to convert it. Rook f e8. Rook takes e8. Here I wanted to mention that if bishop d4, then rook e7. And what is the point after rook d to e8?
Bishop takes f7?
Yes, very well. Just bishop f7 and we are winning material. So that's why she had to play rook f e8 immediately. Take, take, king f1, rook d8, king e2, king f8. And well, now it's clear that Black's plan is just to bring the king towards f6 and then claim that it's a drawish position. White has to come up with a plan here, how to place the pieces and what to do next then.
Maybe king f3?
Okay, king f3, it's just a move, not a plan, but well, king f3 is a part of the plan which White has, but unfortunately it will be met by rook d2, so we have to do something about covering first this d2 square, so that the pawn on f2 won't be hanging then and the rook won't be able to create any threats. Unfortunately, we cannot allow to exchange rooks because of the opposite colored bishops, then it will be just an easy draw for Black, so we should be keeping the rooks on the board. How else could we cover the d file?
Maybe by bringing the bishop to d3?
Very well, indeed. Bishop c4, king e7, bishop d3. King f6 and now king f3. Bishop d4 followed. Now c3 is not a move we want to play, even if bishop takes c3 wouldn't be possible. We want to keep our bishop on d3, so rook e1. The point being that after bishop b2 we have rook b1 and then we take on b7. So b6, b3, bishop e5. Okay, we got to this position. We placed our bishop nicely so that the rook doesn't do anything on the d file. What is the next part of the plan which white should be doing?
Try to push g5 at some point. F4 g5.
Yes, very well. Because if you notice, the king on f6 might actually be in a mating net. Because imagine we push g3, f4, g4, and then at some point king h4, g5 will most likely be mate. So I started by playing g3, because if playing g4 immediately, king g5 will happen. So, well, maybe not immediately, but after defending the bishop. So we have to be careful about controlling the dark squares. King g2 now, rook e7, bishop e4. Like I said, we don't want to exchange the rooks. Bishop c3, rook e3, bishop d4, rook e2, c5, and now f4. Bishop c3, g4, rook d7, bishop d3. And now the point is that she cannot play rook e7 because of
g5.
g5, yes. And the rook on e7 will be left without defense. c4 followed. Well, it is a little bit desperate, but black has very big trouble because king g3 and king h4 is the threat, followed by g5. Another threat is king f3 and then rook g2 followed by g5. And the problem will be that after h takes, f takes, king e7 or king e5, f6 will follow, and then the h pawn will become a free pawn. So c4, b takes c4, because if we take with the bishop, then again rook d2, and it will be difficult to win this endgame. It's probably just a draw. B takes c4, bishop b4, king f3. Bishop a3. Now, what do we do next?
Rook g2.
Rook g2 would be the normal move, yes. The point is that here black can play bishop c1, and unfortunately we do not have g5, because after h takes, f takes, bishop g5. And somehow black is holding it, because after rook g1 he has bishop d2, and he's able to keep this bishop on the c1 g5 diagonal, so that we cannot play g5. Wait, how did I think I repeated? No, I played rook e1 first. Bishop b4 now. Again, rook g1 will be met by bishop d2. That's actually what happened. Rook d1, bishop b4, king g3. Now I want to play king h4, but black has this rook d4 move. And it seems like all my efforts were in vain. Black is being able to build some kind of a fortress. But no, there still is a plan for white to play for a win. King f3, bishop d6, king e3. It looks like I'm giving up a pawn, but it's actually not the case, because after rook f4 we have this nice move bishop e2. And actually the rook, funnily enough, is kind of trapped on f4. If the bishop goes anywhere, we just go with the rook either, okay, if bishop c7, then rook d7, if bishop b8, rook d8, and then we start creating threats towards black's pawns on a7 and b6, I mean. That's why here she played bishop c5, and that's the critical moment of probably the entire game. Because if white plays king f3, then just bishop d6 back, and it will be a draw by repetition. So there is a really nice move, which white has here in order to keep the chances for a win. How should we proceed?
Do you have some kind of g5?
G5, h takes.
H takes and rook g1.
But then just rook f4 or after rook g1 actually rook d8 or rook d3 check, and the rook on g1 will be hanging in the end.
Oh, yeah.
It would be nice if we could play rook g1 here, but then again after rook d3 the rook is hanging in the end on g1. But the idea is correct, that we should be giving up something, but then claim that black won't be able to stop g5.
So rook d2?
Rook d2, very well. Rook d2 is the move, and the idea is that after rook c4 we have king f3, rook a4, okay, rook a4 or rook d4, and rook g2. And again g5 is coming, and then if king e7 then just f6 and g takes h6, or if he takes first on g5 then h6 again. Okay, this is a nice move, but the problem is that black can continue just staying. Rook d7, king f3, now rook g2 again is a threat, so bishop a3 to be ready to meet it with bishop c1, king e4 now. This is another stage of my plan to activate my pieces as much as possible before creating the breakthrough. The point is that if rook e7, then the king just goes towards the a7 pawn, king d5, rook d7, king c6, and so on. That's why she played bishop b2, now rook d1, bishop c3, and a3. This is a useful move, just to limit a little bit the bishop so that it has less squares to maneuver around. Rook d4, king f3, rook d7. Okay, so we somehow managed to create a slightly better position than before. The pawn is on a3, the bishop can't go on b4, but still every time we bring the rook towards g1 it will be bishop d2, rook g2, bishop c1, and it seems like it's not possible to make progress. But it actually is. So let's find a plan for white.
King g3?
Unfortunately, when we will play king g3, king h4, it will be met by rook d4. And again, after g5, h takes g5, we won't be able to take with the pawn because of the pin.
So rook b1, rook b5?
Yes, very well. It is indeed the plan. Rook b1, rook b5, and then try to create a free pawn by playing c5. Bishop d2 followed, rook b5, rook d4, c5, b takes, rook f4. Now it is not an easy choice where to go with the king, to defend the pawn on g4 by playing king g3 or to play king e2. King g3, okay, it was king e2 indeed. King g3 would be met by rook a4, and unfortunately we are not able to keep the a3 pawn, and even though we'll have the c pawn, black will have the a pawn, it will probably be enough for a draw. By playing king e2 we create somehow unbalanced pawn structure. Bishop c1 is the only move. Now rook a5, rook takes g4, rook takes a7. And now we see that our pawns will actually be the ones who will advance faster than black's. King e5 followed. What next? Do we take on f7? Do we do something else?
Just push a4.
Yes, very well. a4, king f4. What about now? We should be careful about our king because, well, might be a perpetual if we don't pay attention.
Bishop c4?
Bishop c4 is also possible, but I think bishop b5 is maybe a little bit better because we also defend the a4 pawn and we can push the c pawn afterwards. Rook g2, king d3, rook g3, king c4, bishop b2, rook c3 is a threat. What do we do?
king b4 or king d5?
Yes, that's correct. King d5 is better because we don't, black doesn't have any checks. After king b4, maybe some bishop c3 and then bishop b2 back. King takes f5 and now rook f7. King g5, a5. And now the position is technically winning. a6, bishop c1, a7 and bishop c6 was a threat. Rook takes g7, king h5 and just c4. And black is unable to fight against these two pawns. Bishop e3, rook g3, king h4, rook f3, king g4, king e4, and black resigned. Okay, so here it was, this game was an example of how to play with the pair of bishops, and then with a minimal advantage, how to try to exploit and somehow force black to give up little things so that we have a better endgame with an opposite colored bishops. Okay, let's move on towards the next game. I will save this. The next game was actually played last year during the World Rapid Championship against Maria Muzuchuk, who is a former women's world champion. e4, c5, knight f3, I was white again, a6, d4, c takes, knight f6, knight c3, knight c6. So black is aiming probably for this variation with knight db5, bishop b4, a3, bishop takes c3, knight takes c3, and so on. That's why I chose a less known move, which is a3, stopping the bishop from going to b4. The normal continuation is d5 here, but after bishop b5, bishop d7, we just take on d5. It takes d5 and play this structure versus an isolated pawn. That was a very simple idea. She chose to play a more complicated line with bishop e7, bishop e3 then, short castle, bishop e2, b6. Okay, now what should be white's setup?
You want queen on d2 and rook on d1?
Queen d2 is indeed correct, but followed up by the long castle.
Oh, okay.
And then to start an attack by playing g4, g5, and so on. Bishop b7, long castle. Also knight b5 might be a threat, but not knight cb5 like I showed here, but knight db5. Knight d4. Queen takes d4. The queen is doing a very well job protecting the pawn on e4 from there. Also bishop c5, actually she played this, yes, is met by queen d3. And the point is that after bishop e3, queen e3, all the dark squares are weak in black's camp, and g4, g5 is coming. She played queen e7. And now, this is the first critical moment of the game. How should be white proceeding? Should we go for the topical push on the king side, or should we do something else?
e5 is bad?
e5, let's check. If e5, then probably knight d5 is somewhat forced, right?
Knight takes.
Knight takes, bishop takes.
And something like bishop f3?
Bishop f3. Well, it is possible, but then there will be a lot of simplifications. Queen takes e3, bishop takes f3, queen takes f3. And it might not be enough here. Rook c8, then rook c7, rook f c8. Very close to equality. What other ideas can be possible?
g4.
g4. G4 is the topical move indeed. Why I didn't like it is that black can, either play immediately bishop e3 or d6, maybe bishop e3 first, queen takes e3, and d6. The point is that after g5 the knight goes to d7, then to c5, rook c8. White is still slightly better here, but there is a better idea actually, and that is bishop g5. Now e5 is a threat. Also, at some point, b4 might be a threat because that bishop is not feeling so comfortable on c5. And the problem is that black cannot capture on f2 because after rook h to f1, e5 is coming and it will definitely be a mate if he's not just losing a piece. Okay, here she had to play e5, defending against us playing it. F3. Okay, now there's no reason to give up that pawn anymore. Rook d8. Black maybe wants to play d5 at some point. So knight d5. Bishop takes. E takes. And now again we have the pair of bishops. Rook e8. What to do next?
Maybe queen f5.
Queen f5, very well. You are going towards the opposite colored bishop endgame, right?
Also, bishop d3 is an idea.
Oh, how? Bishop d3. Right, very well. That's why black has to play e4. Bishop takes f6. Queen takes. Take. Take on e4. Rook e4. Bishop f3. And now we have again this endgame where basically we are a pawn up because black's pawns are doubled and they are not advancing. So we have an extra pawn on the queen side. Rook e5, rook e1, rook e8, king d2. Okay, unlike the previous endgame, here black will have a lot of problems if exchanging all the rooks because the king will just pass through the white squares towards black's pawns. So our plan will be king d2, king d3. Okay, let me show it. Rook e1, king e1, just bringing it towards c4 and then creating a free pawn, and in the same time black should always look after his pawn on the king side because they might also be quite weak. That's why she played bishop e3 here, king d3, bishop d4. Okay, now rook takes e5, bishop takes e5. It's a double attack. How should we proceed here? It is right that we have to keep our pawns on the queen side because giving up the h2 pawn doesn't really change something, but we have a nice intermediate move before. It's rook e1. Now the rook is pinned, and when the rook goes, then c3. Bishop takes h2, rook h1.
But why not king f8 instead?
Here you mean, king f8. Yes, it is possible, but then probably bishop e4. Okay, or wait. Or maybe we can start with something. Let me think. It's a good question. Now I remember. The point is that here, after playing c3, bishop takes h2, we'll be able to play rook h1 and the pawn on h7 is falling. Yeah, so that's why she went away with the rook. c3, bishop h2, rook h1, bishop f4, rook h4. Now the rook wants to enter black's camp through c4 and c7, bishop c1. We have slight problems with our pawns there, so what should we do?
B3. Yeah.
b3 with the idea that after bishop a3, rook a4. It's a possibility, but instead king c2 is another possibility, but instead I set a little trap for black by playing rook a4. The point being that if bishop takes b2, then king c2, bishop a1, now rook a7, rook c8, while the trap is almost there, but not. d6. Now the point is that bishop c3 is losing because of rook c7, and if taking on c7, d takes and the pawn becomes a queen, while if rook c3, then just king b1 and the bishop is lost. Okay, that's why she couldn't take on b2, she played a5 first. Now b4, a takes, rook e8, rook a7. Now the position is winning because if you see, black's king is very passive on g8, while ours is creating immediate threats towards black's pawns on the queen side. d6, rook c7, rook c6 is a threat, so bishop f4, and king c4. And okay, the king is going towards c6, and we will be just winning one of the pawns, either b6 or d6. Okay, I think it's okay not to see the game any longer because it is easy to win here. Let's move towards the next game. I will save this. And this time I was playing with the black pieces against a lower rated opponent. She was 2270, I think, or something like that. e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, knight c3, knight f6. Okay, this variation might be really annoying when playing against lower rated opponents because it's difficult to win, to have some sort of a complicated game. E takes, knight takes, bishop b4, knight c6, b takes, bishop d3. Well, now if you are familiar with these positions, d5 is the main line, e takes, and there are a lot of games which are drawn this way actually. So I chose a lesser known plan, which is short castle, and rook e8. The idea is just to win the pawn on e4, so bishop c3 is the threat. The logical way for white to play, what would be here? Queen f3 is one way, but maybe, well, it might be better to start with bishop g5 immediately. Now we are pinned, so h6, bishop h4, and black's idea is quite risky here, but we'll get to a very interesting position, and that was actually the whole idea behind this variation, just to get a complicated game where both players will have to work hard. g5, bishop g3, take on c3, take on e4. And now it looks like black is a little bit behind with the development. The bishop on c8 is quite far from being happy there. Also our king is opened, so black has to be very precise here in order not to get in immediate trouble. Queen h5, d6. Okay, now queen h6 is one possibility. Another possibility is to play f4. If queen h6, then bishop f5 was the idea. And then if f4, just rook e6, queen h5, queen f6. F takes, queen takes c3. And the bishop on f5 cannot be touched because of queen takes a1. The position is still really messy, but we will get to something similar to what happened in the game, and we'll see how that developed. f4, bishop f5 again, bishop e4, rook takes e4, queen takes h6, rook e6, queen h5, queen g5 was another possibility, but then would just take and take on c2. And again, we get, like in the previous game, in a position where it's easier for black to advance the pawns rather than for white. And also, if exchanging all the rooks, it will most likely be one for black. That's why she tried to keep the queens on for longer. Also, with our king open, it makes sense to keep the queens on the board. Queen f6, take, queen g6, queen f3 followed, bishop e4, queen f4, and bishop takes c2. Okay, now black's plan is really simple, to play rook e8, rook e2, then maybe bishop e4, and okay, then this would be a different game. Here she played rook e1, rook e8, take, take, and rook e1, claiming that this endgame should be close to being drawish. Rook takes e1, bishop takes e1. How should black play now? Any ideas? Maybe we can create some direct threats.
Queen a6.
Queen e6, you mean, probably. Yes, very well. Attacking the pawn on a2, the bishop on e1. But what after bishop f2? Do we take that pawn or not?
Just queen e2?
Queen e2 is also possible, but then h3, defending against the mate, and the problem is that our king might be exposed. Bishop d4 and queen f6 might be really unpleasant. That's why it's good to limit the bishop first by playing c5, so that the bishop cannot go on that diagonal any longer. h4, and now I took the pawn. A brave decision, but let's see if it works out. Queen f6, queen e6. Now, if white exchange the queens, then we have a lot of pawns on the queen side, and that should be more than enough in order to win. So queen d8, king g7, h5. White's idea is to try to create some mating threats against our king. Bishop e4, h6, king h7, queen f8. Okay, now queen g6 is kind of forced. Bishop e3, bishop d5, bishop d2. It's not easy to advance the pawns for black because the queen will just attack them and take one by one. So we have to be careful here. a6, c4, bishop takes c4, bishop c3. Now queen h8 is a really unpleasant threat. So queen g8, queen e7, bishop d5, bishop g7, queen c8, g6, king takes, queen f6, king h7, queen g5. Now bishop e4, the bishop comes to g6 in order to cover a little bit the king. Bishop c3, queen g8. Here I repeated the position, I think, once, and then I played bishop g6. Queen f6. Okay, now we still have to do something about that mate on g7, so queen g8, g4. And it's not so easy to advance the pawns here, right? What would be your thoughts in this position? How to win? Because it should be winning, right? Having so many pawns up.
Bishop e4 to start.
Yeah, bishop e4 is a good move, but I wanted to play d5 because now d4 is a very unpleasant threat. I'm forcing white to play bishop e5, and now only bishop e4. g5, a5. Bishop takes c7, a4. Bishop d6, queen g6. Bishop c5, take. There was no way for white to keep all the pawns, because after queen g6, king g6, if bishop c5, then again king takes g5. And with so many free pawns, black should be able to convert it. We will come to a very similar endgame. She took on c5 immediately. That's a better version, because here she is able to defend the f6 pawn. Bishop d4, king f4. Bishop b2. Okay, now we have 2 extra pawns, but still white is stubborn, not resigning. How should we be converting this advantage? There is actually only one winning move in this position.
Bishop f3?
Bishop f3, very well. What is the idea?
She played king e4?
Yes, you are right. And also the main point of this move, bishop f3, is that we don't allow the king to go towards... yes, because after king e1 there will be king e3, king d3, and the king is not able to pass. Unfortunately, in the time trouble, I did not play it, and I played bishop d3. Bishop a3 followed, king e4, king e1, king d4, king d2, king c4. As many times happens in our games, unfortunately, in the most necessary moment we are not always able to find the best move. But okay, the defense is still not so easy for white here. Bishop d6, bishop f5, bishop e7, d4. Bishop d6, king b3. Bishop e5, d3. King c1, a3. And now, how do you make draw with white? Because black didn't play the best way, and I unfortunately gave some chances. Let's see if you find them.
Bishop f4?
Bishop f4, I think, should be working. In the game she played bishop d4, but okay, we will be able to come to this bishop f4 position. Let's see. For example, you play bishop f4, okay. I play king a2. How do you continue?
Bishop e5?
d2?
I just take, no?
King b1?
Ah, I did, okay.
Another try?
So bishop d2?
Bishop d2, okay. King b3?
And king d1?
If king b1, then a2 and king c2.
Okay.
And if bishop e3, then d2 again. And if bishop d2, a2. Not an easy task, huh? Okay, the move in the game didn't spoil anything, so okay, I will just show it. Bishop d4, king a2. And now is the moment of truth. Only one move is making a draw.
Bishop e3.
Bishop e3, okay. Bishop e4.
Maybe c3? Bishop is instead of bishop e3? Bishop c3 instead?
Yes, maybe.
It's actually the losing move, bishop c3.
Wow.
Bishop e3 was good?
Yes, bishop e3 was good, but you had to see the follow-up after bishop e4. The only two squares which you can keep the bishop on is f4 and e3. Bishop f4. And now if d2, then bishop takes d2. Let me show. And after king b3, bishop f4, a2, and bishop e5, right? And then it's a draw. The problem of bishop c3 is that you don't have a follow-up move. So after bishop c3, black just gives the move to white. And now there is no good square for the bishop. She played bishop d2, now king b3, and like in the previous variation which we saw, after king b1, a2, king a1, king c2, one of the pawn passes. And if bishop f4, then just d2. And again, king d2, then king b2, king b1, and a2, a1. That's actually what happened in the game. And here, white resigned. Okay, so from this game we have to remember that not all the endgames with opposite colored bishops and no other pieces are drawn, and it's usually it's useful to have two free passed pawns, because then it's harder for white to keep both of them away from queening. Okay, I think that will be it for today. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
I hope you will get inspired for playing some bishop endgames.